Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Chris Black, and I'll be guiding us today through today's session alongside Seth Early, our speaker. You're in the right place if you're in manufacturing IT and you're tired of digging into disconnected systems to find the data you need.
You don't have to be in manufacturing IT. You can be a business user, you can be in other organizations anytime you're dealing with disparate data. So anyway, but we're going to be focused.
Yes.
Uh,
So today we're going to talk about how AI-powered search and structured metadata can help you reduce friction, unlock hidden insights, and make the systems you already have actually work for your teams. A quick word about early information science. Early information science has been helping global enterprises detect and organize their data since 1994. They specialize in making product information more findable, usable, and valuable, with proven results across manufacturing, distribution, e-commerce, and other industries. Leading us today is Seth Early, founder and CEO of Early Information Science. He's also author of The AI-Powered Enterprise, and is one of the most respected voices in the world of enterprise information architecture. If anyone can help us cut through the AI noise and focus on what actually drives business value, it is Seth. So before we dive in, just a quick ask. These things are always better with your participation. So throughout the webinar, we're going to launch a few polls. They'll help us tailor the conversation to what matters most to you. So when you see one pop up, please join in. We'll also have time for questions at the end. With that, Seth, let's get started.
Terrific. So we are recording today, and I want to thank our sponsors, CMS Wire and Vector. And we already went through this. So I'll just talk about, this is the agenda. We're going to be, talking about the problem that you are familiar with. You have disparate data, you have disparate product information that is usually across lots of different systems and processes. And then there are challenges with the quality of that data and the structure of that data. So we'll talk about ways to do that. I'm going to talk about how we want to orchestrate product data and content throughout the customer journey. So I have an animation that will show you how complex that ecosystem is and how we really need to think of this in a holistic fashion. And we'll get into how you build the foundation for doing this. You need to have a reference architecture. Well, when people say AI is going to help or AI is going to be the solution, it's not that simple, right? We still need human intervention. I'm going to show you some approaches for doing this with something called modular RAG, retrieval augmented generation. It is an agentic approach, and we'll show you how various large language models can be used to fill product data and to enrich it and to also derive attributes. But it's not one size fits all. We do need to use multiple language models to do very specific tasks. And this is part of our virtual information architect platform, which accelerates the time to be able to do these things. We'll get into measuring business value. Some of you may have seen some of my slides on looking at layering from product information and content through the process that it's supporting, through business outcomes, and then aligning with enterprise strategy. That's super important because we need to make those connections so that executives understand why they're making these investments, right? It may be obvious to you, but it's not obvious to other people. And then we'll talk about getting started with prioritization. How do you prioritize projects? You can look at things that have a very clear ROI, or you can look at things that are really part of how you do business. You can consider these from a perspective of something that is going to cut across the entire organization, or you may want to start in a departmental manner and shampoo, rinse, repeat. So we'll talk about how you can do that and how you can put some structure to that process. So again, this is something you already are familiar with. We have lots of systems that are siloed. They have different organizing principles. They're not necessarily well integrated. When you're trying to search for information, you are pogo sticking in and out, right? We just solved this problem, addressed this problem for one of our customers, where when a field service rep needed to go in and understand a particular problem, they had to find what system to go into. And so they would dive in and then they would come out. They dive in and they come out. And what we did was built a unified search across these different applications. So many times when you don't have that integration, you can build a semantic layer and you can use your reference architecture and your ontology and your knowledge graph as a mechanism to communicate between these different systems. So that lingua franca, right? That Rosetta Stone between the different applications. And again, people are not able to find stuff. They spend inordinate amounts of time searching, and IT is just trying to keep up, right? IT is just trying to keep their head above water, especially with the incredibly rapid changes we're seeing now. So rather than doing that, we need to help IT organizations be able to get ahead of the curve and to be able to accelerate the things they're doing. And that's what AI is going to do for us. It's going to accelerate things that we can do that maybe would take a lot of time and effort, but can be done much more quickly these days. And we'll get into how that's done and exactly how to do it. And again, if you don't have that infrastructure and if you don't have those organizing principles, it slows the organization down inexorably. It's like lots of little places where there are inefficiencies, and it's not one big problem, it's lots of little problems. I like to say you're getting pecked to death by ducks, right? You're getting lots of little things that are happening that are very challenging. Chris, you want to introduce the poll?
Absolutely. And it's so true. You can have the best systems in the world, but if your teams are still spending hours finding specs and product data, that investment all just sits there idle. So in this poll, we'd love to hear, where do your teams waste the most time in searching for information today? Is it across your ERP and PLM systems? Is it across the PIM or the e-commerce platforms? Maybe it's inside shared drives or intranet, across all CRM and sales systems, or maybe there's something else. We'd love to hear in the Q&A. So we'll give this just a moment here. What do you think, Seth? What's your suspicion with your experience?
In terms of where this is going, well, I think everybody has problems. At least some of those systems have some structured data. But obviously, when we're looking at intranets and we're looking at unstructured content, that's where people have not necessarily made the investments. And so we end up with a lot of systems that are disconnected, but also we don't have the right organizing principles in those intranets and those shared drives. So do you want to go ahead? Should we end the poll? It looks like we only got a few people responding, but give you another minute. So go ahead. The analogy is popcorn popping. It goes quickly and then it starts slowing down, and then people's
brains. Well, and as suspected, it's that shared drives and intranet that really that folks are mentioning in here. Not really a big surprise, right? Thanks for weighing in, everybody.
Yeah, great. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about some of the risks here and some of the challenges. And again, when we look at this from the perspective, we have lots of systems, and I always like to say that the answer to having too many places to go to application proliferation is another application. So, we just want one place to be able to put everything, or we want to be able to integrate in this application. You can't really do that, right? Because there's always going to be lots of systems. So you have to be able to manage those in place and be able to search in place and build an index that's going to cut across lots of different things. There's a lot of handoffs in terms of supply chain management. There's a lot of friction in those processes. There's a lot of knowledge that is tacit, that is in the minds of people. And you try to embody those in systems, but it really still ends up adding a lot of friction to the process. And of course, when we have missed opportunities or delays, or we can't react fast enough, we can't get products to market, we can't launch quickly enough, then we are going to, it's going to impact margin, right? It's going to impact profitability. And of course, there's always a lot of lost time searching for information. Now, sometimes that does not make for the business case. Sometimes it does, right? If you have people who are spending a lot of time, like in field service or customer support, and you're logging how much time they're spending searching for information, that translates into real dollars, right? Because we had one company, Applied Materials, right? That was had 3,000 field service reps. They were spending 40% of their time searching for information. We cut that in half. That ended up saving them $50 million per year. And that was very clear from the hard data that they had around timesheets and around all that time tracking. Another organization, also field service, is seeing a similar problem or similar results. The techs spend about 30% of their time. And a lot of it is on phone calls with their colleagues or master technicians or supervisors and that ends up, when you're talking to another technician, you're doubling that time, right? You're wasting time on both sides because you're asking another person for that, and that could be better spent elsewhere. So here's where I want to start talking about how you have to orchestrate this, because when you think about product information and what are you trying to do, right? You're trying to serve a customer, but you're also serving lots of internal stakeholders when you're onboarding new products, when you're bringing in products to the market, right? So you have product development or product onboarding, because you're either developing the products themselves, and that gets into product lifecycle management. We're going upstream to research, development, commercialization, and all of that requires a lot of information that we need to share and organize, and also harvest the knowledge and the content and the data that's going to be used ultimately for the customer experience. But when you're building these things, you don't necessarily know what attributes are going to be important for an end customer, right? That happens farther down the line. So we have a lot of content and data and knowledge that's locked in these upstream systems. But at the same time, you're onboarding or you're introducing a product or bringing it to market, you're doing demand generation, right? There's a lot of things that are going on in parallel in the marketing organization, in market research, in development, in brand management, in merchandising calendars. So we need to be able to onboard these products into our systems. We need to know what attributes are important. So we have to create the right product data models. Because again, as if you're a B2B supplier and you have a procurement manager who's one of your users, and you have a design engineer who's another user, and maybe a maintenance, someone who's in charge of maintaining a system, they're going to care about different things, right? The design engineer really wants to know what those capabilities of those products are. The procurement person is going to want to understand, total cost of ownership, right? And the lifetime of that product. Is it going into something that's going to have a 20-year life cycle? Well, they need to know that it's going to be supported for that period of time. But again, we're trying to get this information. We're trying to do things like promotions and campaigns, and we need to get feedback on that. We need to integrate this content into our content strategy and onboard it for the e-commerce environment. We need to provision customer self-service. We need to provision customer support. And all of these things require that we look across these environments and we speed up the information metabolism of the organization. When there's friction in these processes, this slows everything down, right? Because your output, one person's output is another person's input. That person who's producing something can't find the information they need to begin that process. That's impacting things downstream. And when you look at this ecosystem of information flows and players, you start realizing that you do need to have maturity in each of these areas. If your content operations are not optimized, you're going to have problems with being able to launch new content, to be able to bring it out, to be able to engage with customers, to manage its life cycle, and so on. I say you need maturity in product information management because many times things get bogged down in that process. We need to be able to understand that customer journey in great detail and build what are called high fidelity journey models. And we need to share knowledge and insights, and we need to collaborate up and down that food chain. And then we can start to personalize, look at how these things can be brought together at the right moment to give people what they need. Again, I wanted to give you this picture because it really is a complex ecosystem. And when we're fixing product data, we're fixing it for lots of different people and processes. So we need maturity in customer experience, in content operations, in product data, in knowledge processes, right? Because every customer journey is a knowledge journey. They're asking questions. What products do you have? What are the best products for me? How do I choose your products? How do I maintain them? What does support look like, et cetera? So we need to think about these things from that holistic perspective so that we can speed things up. And we're going to talk about metrics and governance, but when you start building the right scorecards and dashboards and you have the right metrics, you can have course corrections. So all of this needs to be backed up by governance processes and by change management processes. And this is one of our ways of looking at this. I mentioned maturity models or maturity. I'm going to show you this a little bit later, but I wanted to bring this up. Each of these areas can be assessed in terms of maturity. What is that current state? What are your capabilities? And they're very clear because it's like a certain stage has certain characteristics. So you can say, yes, we can do that, or no, we can't do that. Or this describes our situation, or this doesn't describe our situation. But you can score where you are today, and then you can look at where you need to be in the future. What is that capability required? And so, so all of these maturity models, and again, some people don't like maturity models, but all I have to say is it's where you start, right? What's your current state? They get subsumed into this orchestration maturity model that says, how do all of these pieces fit together and how do they work? Because again, we're looking at this environment where we have all these disparate systems, we have all these disparate processes, and product data will live in many, many locations, just as customer data will live in many locations. So this becomes a real challenge when we're trying to do this because, again, there are different KPIs, there are different purposes, there's different attributes, there are different metadata designs, and there are different data architectures across these environments. So being able to consolidate that and to enrich it is really challenging. So we have source systems, and many times this is coming from distributors or coming from manufacturers if you're a distributor or you're a retailer of some sort, or it might be coming from the research and development organization or commercialization group. They have to get you the product. You got to get the product data someplace, right? Then we need to enrich it. We need to say, well, what's the purpose of this product data in this downstream application? And what attributes are going to be necessary for that? What does good data fill look like? How do we make sure that those attributes of product information are aligned with what the customer needs and what other people need, right? Other players in this organization. So again, we look at the bottom, that's where we have those metrics, dashboards and those scorecards, because we need to measure how we're doing. And of course, we're publishing to lots of different applications. We're publishing to lots of different services, to different channels, to different audiences. And we're going to talk about syndication, product data syndication, where if you are working through a distributor, if you don't have good product data, you are invisible, right? People cannot find you because you're only visible when you have product data. So you have to really think about that. And if you can't find it, you can't buy it, or you can't use it, you can't reuse it. Now, when you start looking at how organizations are trying to tackle this stuff, right? We have the business who is trying to solve their problem. We have IT who's trying to enable the solution. And these two audiences, these two groups, these two sets of stakeholders have to work very, very carefully, closely together, and they need to be able to understand what the others need, what the other needs, right? Because think of it this way, your IT is going to help to solve a data problem, but they're not necessarily going to solve the problem. And depending on the context, right? A merchandiser will know more about what a product, what a customer needs, and can therefore inform what product data attributes. IT can enrich those product data attributes, but they're not necessarily going to know what those need to be, right? That comes from other subject matter experts. And you can also think of, let's imagine that you have a CRM, you're using Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever, and the data is terrible, right? Salespeople are not putting information into the system. They're not tracking opportunities. They're not logging their calls. That is a data problem. But it's a bigger process problem than it is a data problem. You're not going to go to the IT organization and say, fix that, right? Because they can't fix that. They are the ones who will enable it, but the business needs to own that data and be able to own the capability in order to be able to keep that up to date. So again, the business cares about different things than IT does, but an IT has different capabilities, but we really need to get them to work closely together and to collaborate for this. And again, these things do add up, right? I think that when you start looking at the problems of downstream product data, poor quality, it costs about 10 times as much to solve it downstream than it does upstream. Now, what's the problem with solving it upstream? There's no incentive, right? It's not my job. People don't necessarily think about that marketing person way downstream when they're doing product data at the start, right? So when you looked at that ecosystem, you realize that there are people that can either contribute to the problem or contribute to the solution inadvertently, right? They're not like they're trying to sabotage something, but if they don't provide the right information at that time, and it might not be important to them, it might not be part of their process or their job or something they're measured on, but it does impact the rest of the organization. And that's where you need to have that bigger picture view and have higher authority, because there's no budget for the common good, right? There's no incentive for the common good. I think there's another way of saying that, but you need someone that says, okay, we're going to do this for the greater good of the organization, even though it doesn't impact your department, or it may impact your department negatively, right? You may not, you may have a disincentive for that. And again, if we miss those windows, if we can't launch a product on time and the competitor beats us to market, that's a real problem. And we need that agility.
All right. So that gets us to our next question about your current structure of your product data. So how would you rate that? Is it structured and well governed? Is there some structure, but maybe it's inconsistent? Barely structured, but lots of manual workarounds? Or maybe you've never really assessed it? So I'm guessing a lot of folks will have some structure, but are inconsistent. What do you think, Seth?
I think that's kind of the middle of the ground there. You know, it's not horrible, it's not perfect, it's somewhere in the middle. So yeah, that would be my sense.
Yeah, and of course that comes with a lot of costs, as you just mentioned, right? So if people aren't able to find it, man, the longer that goes, the larger the costs are to get that fixed. So go ahead and jump in here. That'll help us inform how to do the next section here. You know, are you very structured and well governed? Do you have some structure but maybe inconsistent? Maybe barely structured, lots of manual workarounds, or you're just not really sure yet, never maybe really assessed it.
Oh, come on. We can get another answer or two.
Come on, we can do it.
Come on. One more. I'll get one more. No, you're not going to do it. Okay. I think they're being oppositional now. Okay. We'll go ahead and end that and share the results.
Oh, look at that. Some
Right in the middle.
structure, but
Right in the middle.
inconsistent.
That's kind of like picking, the middle, on a scale of 1 to 10, then people pick 5. Or
And chances are, if they
yeah,
were really well structured and well governed, they probably wouldn't be here to see what they
that's
could do
right.
about it, right?
That's right. Did we share the results? Okay. And now we can stop. All right, great. So let's carry on. So when we look at this and we're trying to build, the foundation of this, we want to be able to have search work across lots of different systems and processes. In order to do that, we need metadata as the bridge. Metadata is that mechanism to translate from one system to another. It's being consistent. We had, for one client, 250 metadata fields that were not labeled and that all had to do with product data. And they were different in different systems. One system would call it one thing, product family, the other would call it product grouping or whatever it was. And that happened across many, many different systems. So the first thing we need to do is understand that and then harmonize it, connect that together. And that's where metadata will bridge that together. And again, it's not necessarily getting new tools or additional tools. It's improving the access to that information and being able to improve the speed at which people can get that information. Again, we're speeding up the information metabolism of the organization. So we're cutting across lots of different systems and processes. So when we're doing this, we need to build a reference architecture. We need to build that foundational metadata that is describing our product data. We need to cut across these different systems so that we understand those data relationships. If you're familiar with knowledge graphs, a knowledge graph is based on an ontology. Ontology is simply the knowledge scaffolding for the organization. It describes the isness and aboutness of everything. What is this thing? And then if I have an SOW and I have 1,000 in a pile, how do I tell them apart, right? That's the aboutness. Those are the attributes. So when we understand what those attributes are and what those entities are, we can start to connect them together. And an ontology is the set of organizing principles for what's important to the business and the organization. And the knowledge graph is a mechanism to access that. So when we overlay the ontology on the enterprise and the data sources, we have the ability to access via a knowledge graph. Now, one of the reasons why we need to think of it more holistically and start at a bigger picture perspective is if we jump right into, say, master data management, right? We have right down at the field level, and we're trying to look just at the metadata and the controlled vocabularies from that metadata. But if you think about it, when we have a concept, a business concept, let's call it methodology. If I were doing this in the SharePoint environment, I could have a SharePoint site collection called methodology, meaning it's a lot of sites and it's all about different methodologies. I could have a site that could be called methodology. Within that site, I could have a library called methodology. Within that library, I could have a list called methodology. I could have a content type called methodology. I could have a metadata field called methodology. I could have a term within the controlled vocabulary in that metadata called methodology, right? So when we start jumping into the weeds without looking at this holistically and without looking at this across the organization, we miss a lot. And that's also why it's not easy to just change a term. Oh, I just want to add a term to a taxonomy. Well, it's not that easy because it could be not just a term, it could be an object somewhere, it could be a process. So again, when we're trying to do this, and what AI will do for us, if it has the right data, if it has the right content, it will be able to give us the right information, the right answers. But that's a big if, because many times it doesn't have that. Here is a reference architecture. When I talk about reference architecture, I'm saying that we need to have a way of organizing information that is supporting both structured and unstructured information, data, content, operational data, historical data, product data, marketing data, user data, all of those different things, transactions. And we have different systems that data resides in. And that's where we look at the information management platforms. Those all need to have the same organizing principles, or when you're at least replatforming and you're launching another tool or upgrading or modernizing, you need to start thinking about what are the organizing principles for this. We had a gating factor at one organization where before they could launch a project, they had to talk about their architecture and the reference architecture and not just build a new set of taxonomies from scratch. And I also like to say that you can't have acts of heroics upstream and expect a seamless customer experience, right? If people are struggling to get to that information, They're not going to have that. So AI powered search can help all of these different stakeholders. And we're going to talk about that in a while. I'll get to that shortly. I did talk about this before, stole my thunder. Many of you have seen this before, but it's starting out when people say, how do I increase revenue? And you're working in the weeds. How do you show that, right? You can't show that fixing my taxonomy or doing this particular process or improving search is going to directly lead to increased revenue. But what it does is it supports a process, right? Content, data, information supports a process. If we improve that, we can score our data. We can say, well, is it complete? Is it accurate? Is it a fit to purpose? So we can have data scorecards, but then we need to say, well, what is the process that we're supporting, right? Because this is where we can show the impact of improved data. If we have better data, we're going to have a better process because it supports that process. We need to understand that process so we can say, well, where are the problems with the data? Now, process supports a business outcome. This is where executives get bonused, or as my colleague Chris Penn likes to say, you catalyze a resume generating event, right? They get bonused or they get fired because this is what's important to the organization. That aligns with the strategy of the enterprise, and that is where we need to have the linkage, right? So when you're doing these projects, you need to say how it's going to support all of these layers so that we can show how it's going to have an impact on the top or the bottom line. And we can do this across the entire ecosystem. I'm sorry about that funky slide. You got to remember when we copy and paste slides, we have to retain formatting. It's always funky when you do that. Anyway, so we can take that layer cake and flip it upside down, right? We call it our metrics layer cake because this is where we have the technology, and you can do it across the entire customer lifecycle. So you have data and technology scorecards, you have process scorecards, and you have outcome scorecards, and you can do that across the entire enterprise. Here's one set of of metrics that either get into the detail of the data completeness, the data accuracy, and then start looking at the processes, right, and the outcomes. But again, this is something you need to decide what is the right metric for your process, and then what are you instrumented for today? Because every time you do these kinds of things, you need to be able to have a baseline, right? We need to build use cases that tell us what good is and what good looks like, and we have to have a baseline. So what is good? What's the new capability going to be? And we either have it or we don't. Use cases need to be unambiguous. Many times people create use cases, oh, we need to build an ontology or we need to use AI. That's not a use case, right? I'm exaggerating there. But if you have something very specific, I need to get to this information under these circumstances in order to support this task or this process, and it's unambiguous and it's clear what the outcome is, that's a good use case. And then we need to measure that. We need to say, well, for that process, what's our baseline? So again, when we start seeing these things, this is from projects that we worked on, reducing the time to market, right? Accelerating the ability to launch new products and services. That's super important. Some organizations it takes weeks to do this because of all the disconnected processes. You want that in hours, right? You want to be able to do that very, very quickly. And you can, and again, I'm going to show you how AI can enrich the product data, improve product data quality, and accelerate these things. We want to be able to, we've had improved self-service, as I mentioned, lots of different tools and processes, lots of different sources of information. You need to consolidate those. You need to have a unified search. And we can do semantic search, we can do AI-powered search, we can do retrieval, augmented generation, and those are going to improve that ability. And of course, we want to be able to look at historical patterns and make sense of those historical patterns and start making better predictions. Here's one organization that when we designed new attributes, built a new taxonomy, this was both navigational hierarchies, plus the back-end taxonomies for the ERP systems, for the PIM systems, and then for the front end to the customer, they saw a 20% increase in revenue. And it's as simple as that sometimes, because when people can't find it, they can't buy it, right? And so you need to have the right descriptors so that people can get to that information much more quickly. And we need to make sure that product search is working much more quickly. Here's an example of a company working through distributors. And in this case, we found $100 million, I'm exaggerating, $100 million, it was only $100 million, in net new revenue when the syndication of the product data was fixed, right? Because if you're working through distributors, you are invisible. So these are real, we have lots of other case studies about this. Now, here's how AI can help. And you're probably saying, why didn't you say this first, right? But there's a lot of market misconceptions, as you know. You're hearing tons of hype. It's not magic. And even when you say, well, we're going to use retrieval augmented generation or RAG, that is not that simple, right? Because you need that data behind the scenes. You do need structured data. You do need structured content. OpenAI has Morgan Stanley as their poster child. for doing AI retrieval augmented generation and using AI in customer service. Now, I met the CIO many years ago, back in 2017 or so, and I'd offered him my paper where I coined the phrase, there's no AI without IA. And he's like, we've already seen that. And I said, really? What did you think? Well, you were the first person to properly identify and articulate the issues and challenges. And what they did with that is they tagged their content. They curated their content. And I was talking to Tom Davenport the other day, who has written 25 books and 5 books on AI, as another one coming out, lots of stuff in the Harvard Business Review. He said the only way they could do that is because they spent 3 years curating that content and tagging that content. That's the only way it would work. It's not magic, folks. It really does need that data. Now, what we can do is we can accelerate this. We can accelerate the derivation of an information architecture, product data architecture, content architecture, knowledge architecture, and apply it to the content, to the product data, to whatever it is. This has a 10x improvement in efficiencies by doing this. I'll explain what we did to do this, but you still need human judgment, right? Our tool, the virtual information architect, requires that you build, and this is one of the things we've done, we build the foundational reference architecture. The AI uses that architecture to build other things, to tag content, to componentize that content, and so on. And what we have done with this tool is we ingest a body of content, a corpus of content, and then we've used our methodologies, our templates, our best practices, our definitions, our examples over the years. We've been doing this for decades. And we instruct the large language model, we instruct the AI into how to develop these things. Here's a definition of a use case. Now, with this corpus of content, tell me what use cases it supports. Tell me what entities you see in this content. Here's what the definition of an entity is. Give me controlled vocabularies. Build an ontology. Propose a content model. And again, we're giving it definitions and examples. And what this does is it allows you to speed up that ability to create that architecture that you need to apply to content and data by a factor of 10, right? The other day, one of my knowledge architects said, here's what I did for this company. And in about 6 hours, she did what would have taken 6 weeks in the past. So this is real. This is real. This is the real deal, guys. I mean, and again, I did a briefing for Forrester yesterday and talked about this. And, they're like, we haven't seen people do this, right? This is really, really leading edge stuff. So this is an example of taking product data and saying, okay, what's our source data look like? So we have an original product name, we have an original description, we have attributes, we have metadata schema. That's going to be part of the prompt, but it's also going to begin by building contextualization for the large language model. We have other things like product data sheets and web pages and content and knowledge bases. Those are the things that are going to inform the product data attributes. Then we have rules and governance, restrictions, style guides, any kind of standards that we have in the industry. We have third-party intelligence, right? Notice that the large language model is considered third-party intelligence because it has knowledge of the world, and this is one of the sources. And we use multiple large language models because no one size fits all, right? We did something recently in Azure, and we needed about 20 services, and we used 5 different large language models specific to the task. That happened to be breaking up content like a monolithic PDF, a 300-page manual into individual components that can then answer questions. And you also see there's an EIS MRO knowledge graph. That was the work that early information science did to build that knowledge graph, that reference architecture for this environment. So you can see that you need, and we also use the Google API and graph, and you can see all of these sources are going to inform the development of this product information. We also need the user's digital body language. What are they doing? What are they clicking through? What's their clickstream analysis? What does their search look like? Are they running into dead ends? Are they pogo sticking in and out? Are they abandoning, or are they converting? What are they actually doing? And this gives us the ability to personalize those results and make recommendations. I always like to say search is a recommendation, right? Or a prediction. I'm predicting you want this answer based on what you're giving me and based on what I know about you, your attributes, who you are, what type of industry you're in, what your job role is, whether you're technical or not technical, what were your past trouble tickets, what equipment do you own? All of those things go into building this. And what we do is we merge these documents into a unified repository, and we generate what are called the embeddings, the document embeddings. And this is creating this vector space. If you don't know what a vector space is, think of it as a mathematical representation of content, of information. And it has multiple dimensions. We can only think of 3 dimensions, but if you add time, it's a 4th dimension. Let's imagine my GPS is taking me on a hill somewhere. So that's 3 dimensions. And I'm on that hill. I want a restaurant, right? That's a 4th dimension. I want it to be there at a certain time. That's a 5th dimension. I want it to be Italian. That's a 6th dimension. I want it to be 3-star rated or better. That's a 7th dimension. I want it to be moderately priced. That's an 8th dimension. You can go on and on. There are thousands, tens of thousands of dimensions in a vector space, vector representation. So when we're bringing that content in, that data, or product information, whatever it might be, we are mapping it in multi-dimensional space, and then we're looking for things that are close by. That's a very overly simplistic way of looking at it, but that's a way to think about it. And then we generate those industry embeddings, those organization-specific embeddings, the ontological embeddings. We have industry, we create that graph index according to the third-party intelligence. We're building the user context, audience, and behavior and application. We also have Q&A embedding. So all of this does, what all of this does is it builds the right context for the large language model. It has the metadata and it understands this world. Now, this is an agentic approach, by the way. Whenever you're calling other APIs, when you're calling other services, when you're iterating through this for multiple records, that is an agentic approach. And so what we do is we go through each record, and the prompt is the old product data, right? So here's the original product data for this case, right? And it's very sparse, right? You don't have a lot of descriptors. And then when we prompt the system, prompt the LLM with that sparse data, we get an output. And this is the output. So here's an example where the name was jumper bars. Now it's Acme shorting bar for electrical terminal blocks. What is it? A dedicated shorting bar designed for electrical terminal blocks to create a secure connection, prevent short circuits. I can say that word, those words. Automotive, manufacturing, automation. There's attributes in here. There's categories. There's better SEO, and it gives you the reasoning. Right. And again, it's drawing from those internal sources and it's drawing from external sources. This is one example. This can be done for hundreds of thousands of products, but it's one approach. We also can do the same thing with knowledge, breaking up large monolithic documents into components that can then be leveraged for downstream applications. Go ahead, Chris. We have one more.
Well, actually, we got a couple more coming.
Oh,
But
we
to
do
get
have a
this
couple
one,
more. Oh,
we
yeah.
do. We have 4
All right.
total. We're going crazy today.
Hmm.
But we have talked about the problem and we've seen what's possible. So we're going to talk about getting started in a moment. But first, let's find out what the biggest barrier is that you have today in improving that product data. Is it legacy systems, siloed data? Is it a lack of internal ownership or governance? Maybe it's a lack of budget or executive support. Maybe you're not sure where to start. I mean, I think I'd be there. Gosh, that's a lot of stuff in there. I'm not sure I'd know where to start. Or is there something else? And if there's something else, we would love to hear about it and add that to the Q&A. So legacy systems, siloed data, lack of ownership or governance, budget, executive support, or uncertain where to start. Seth, in your experience, what do you usually hear about?
Well, usually I hear lack of budget. I hear that they don't have the resources to do it, but many times it's governance. My guess would be a lack of budget and executive support. Some people are saying in the Q&A all of the above. So it should be select all that apply rather than a single thing, right?
Fair enough.
But if we can get one more, come on, we can get one more out of you guys. I know there's at least 8 people on this call. We have about 45 registrants. So usually a third of you participate, so or can make the session. All right, we did get another one. Let's go ahead and poll and share the results.
That's a good spread there.
Nobody said lack of budget.
Wow.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So usually we find that it's just too expensive to do these things. With product data, people are part of product data. People are usually saying, well, this is something we absolutely need to do. It doesn't end, but you can accelerate that. You can make that much more efficient and much more effective. Okay, let's go ahead and start talking about having trouble with the alliteration. So when you think about doing these initiatives, right, when you try to build these things, one of the things that happens, some of us may not have made it to the budget barrier, is what someone said. Okay, thank you. Regardless of how many are on the call, I find this really informative. Thank you, I appreciate that. But I do like more people to participate. I know we have more than 8 people on the call, but anyway, but thank you for that. And Some of them have not made it to the budget barrier. That's interesting. So when you start thinking about how you can do this, well, one of the things we need to do is we need to look at that current state, right? What is the state of the metadata? What's the state of that content, that product data? What are those different systems? How disparate are they? What do those processes look like? And then we want to say, well, what's going to give us the biggest bang for the buck? I call these information leverage points, meaning you can have an intervention and it's going to have a disproportionate impact downstream, right? Where there's a little bottleneck that's holding up lots of other processes, okay? So where do you get that leverage when you can get better data, faster data, or data that's more complete, or data that you never had, or a capability, right? We want to make sure that we look at those high impact use cases. We get those from surveys and from discussions and from conversations, understanding those pain points, right? We want to solve the big pain points and see what that's going to do in terms of our metric, right? Because again, we need the use case, we need the baseline, and we need to be able to measure the impact of what we're doing, what that intervention will be. That also means we need to understand the process. Now we can add AI search into these existing systems, but we have to prepare the data. And that's what's super important. When we build these things, we call them proof of value projects, not proof of concept. Proof of concept gets thrown away. Proof of value is something you can expand, you can extend, you can scale, you can operationalize, right? So we want to look at how we can do these things in a way that's going to be deployable. So again, what all of this is saying is that understand that current state, understand where that pain point is, understand the value of this, and then be able to have this intervention where you can build in those capabilities. Now, this is a readiness scorecard, right? So this is saying, how mature are you in these different areas, product data, governance, product taxonomy, et cetera. But when you look at this, right, so this is saying that where are you today? But when you look at just one of these, say product data maturity, well, there's a whole maturity model behind that I showed you before. So getting a 1 out of this is kind of an average across these different elements. So we want to be able to say, how do we get to that answer? It's the so what. So what? Whenever you say, well, I'm going to do this assessment, well, so what? What difference does it make? It tells me that how big a problem I have. It tells me where to start. It also tells me that if my process requires that I be at stage 3 maturity, again, you don't have to be at stage 5. You can be at stage 2 or 4 or whatever. It depends on your process. It depends on the customer expectations. It depends on the industry, the competitors, and so on. But when we have to do that, and we have to go a couple of stages, we can't do that in 6 weeks and $50,000, right? That's going to be a major initiative. And sometimes having that visualization, and by the way, maturity is lumpy, right? It's not the same. You have pockets of great capabilities in any organization, and you have pockets that are less mature, that are behind the 8 ball for whatever reason, right? So maturity is lumpy. So you have to say, where do we have the maturity, and can we emulate those best practices? Can we bring that to another part of the organization that has lower levels of maturity? This is a great way to start building that capability internally, because many times these are capabilities that you need to own, right? These become part of core competency, and you can't outsource your core competency. So when you start building these prioritizations, when you start building these projects, again, you understand, where am I today? What's that current state? What are the problems I have? And where do I need to be? What is that target future state? I want to be able to reduce the time that field service techs spend in looking information. I want to improve search across the enterprise. I want to improve search with these knowledge bases, whatever it might be. And so we have multiple targets, right? Because we have multiple characteristics of current states. We have problems in different parts of the organization. What those are going to do, many times you can do one project that'll address multiple capabilities, right? We're not solving an individual points problem, we're solving a class of problems. So when we do these things, we're looking, where can we have impact other stakeholders, other processes, and so on. That's why the prioritization does look at the number of processes. But what this is going to do is going to say, what are the preconditions? Where do we need to build a foundation so that we can do something else, right? So this is how you start building a roadmap, because the roadmap is going to say, you have to start here, and we're going to start with this very high value use case, or you may start with something that is lower value but easier, right? It depends on what your appetite is. It depends what your budget is. It depends on what your capabilities are. But the idea here is that you're going to have a set of projects that you're going to move forward with, and then you're going to have leading projects. What are you going to start with? So all of this is very doable and it's very logical. And you can do this by capability, right? You can prioritize by capability. What do you need? What needs to be improved? What process? And again, you need to understand process because you can't automate what you don't understand, right? You have to understand that and understand AI isn't an all fix-it solution, right? It is an intervention. And we need to have an intervention at a specific point in a process. And again, it could be better findability for field service. It could be better findability for the customers themselves. It could be, being able to do better forecasting, whatever it is. We also need to understand processes so we can prioritize by process which workflows are not efficient or not effective. We can say, well, it's really about a challenge. It's really about a pain point. Or we can say, it's based on this repository. We're going to fix this knowledge base. So these are all the different perspectives. And one of the things I want to show you is that you will have different characteristics. So this one is based on a capability. The columns, right, across the top are the classes of attribute for what is important to you. What is the key thing that is going to help you determine whether you should do this project or not? It could be the number of processes. It could be the number of applications. It could be enterprise versus department, ROI or cost of doing business. It could be degree of difficulty, complexity, how measurable it is. If it's a clearly measurable or instrument for that. Do you need new technology? Now, in some cases, for one organization, they're going to say, well, my prioritization is different than this. So I might say, I don't want to support a large number of processes. In this case, we're giving it a higher score if it supports more processes, because this organization wanted to be able to impact multiple processes. Another organization said, that's too complex, right? That's taking too big a bite. I want to only look at one process. So they may say a small number of processes is a 3 and a large number of processes is a 1. So they'll deprioritize things that have multiple processes. Again, a number of applications or content sources. Maybe you only want small, just a few content sources. Again, you're going to invert that. You're going to change that prioritization, and your large number of applications is going to be a 1, and your lower number of applications is going to be a 3. And the same thing with all of these, right? So what we're doing is we're saying, what is the capability that we want to build? And then what are the factors that will go into prioritization? It could be the budget that's available. It could be the resources. It could be the skills, right? It could be any number of things because these are just a sample, but you can have many, many different functions. This is the same columns for the processes, but on the left, you see it's a different a different process, right? These are sales processes, but they're specific types of process within the sales organization. But the same idea, am I going to prioritize based on, I want to solve a lot of problems, or maybe I want to have a small purview because I want to be able to learn and iterate, right? I want to have low risk projects versus a highly visible cross-organizational process. Same thing here. It could be done by repository and so on. So this is choose your own adventure, right? What do you want to do here in terms of how you want to focus? And do you want to do it by capability, by process, by pain, whatever? And then what are those factors that are going to be important to you? Because I just picked a sampling of them, and there's many, many more. So when you look at this big picture, it's really, again, starting to, and I say IT needs to own this because they need, or lead this because they need to be able to build those core processes. They need to be able to build that infrastructure, build that reference architecture, right? They need to do some very heavy lifting on the technical side, especially when we start looking at AI and large language models. Now, again, retrieval augmented generation uses your data for the large language model. I'm sure most of you have heard of that, but it's being thrown about as a fix or a solve for everything. But it is not that easy, right? Because you're trying to build capabilities that are enabled to answer specific questions. Where does it get that information? You're not asking the large language model about these things, because if you do what everybody else does and you use the LLM to answer certain questions, you're getting efficiency, but you're not getting competitive advantage. Competitive advantage comes from differentiation. Differentiation comes from your knowledge of markets, your knowledge of customers, your knowledge of the solutions, your engineering capabilities, your knowledge of the competition, etc. All of those things form the knowledge capital that you need to access and that everybody in your organization needs to access in order to be competitive, right? In order to be able to do this. And if you speed up that access to your knowledge, again, the fact that large language models can answer questions is a little bit of a red herring in a way, right? It's great. You can answer, but it's better to answer questions based on your data. It can still add a lot of value, but it has to be based on your data. And when you start saying, do not answer this question if you don't have the data from this source, only answer the question if you get the data from this source. If you don't have it from this source, say, I don't know. That will virtually eliminate hallucinations. Again, we need to understand those business needs. We need to talk to our users. We need to survey them. We need to understand how they do their jobs day to day and how we can help them do their jobs better. Again, when we start to think about how IT can really provide value, it's going from maintaining the systems, keeping the lights on, to really innovating and helping the business innovate. And that's what we want to do. We want to build that infrastructure so we can innovate. And of course, it's an enabler of higher velocity for the business, getting to market faster, developing products more quickly, getting customers onboarded, supporting the customer, closing out trouble tickets. All of those things require agile information systems and capabilities. So there's things you can do. You want to look at the product data, understand where it is, understand how it's accessed, understand the quality. We have tools to do that as well, right? We can go through catalogs and evaluate them. We want to understand the user's perspective, right? We want to start in a way that's going to be able to be measurable and impactful and be able to show the organization that you can solve these problems. And when you do that, you're going to get other people involved and interested. They go, wow, that's pretty cool. Can I have some of that? We've seen that time and time again, and you shampoo, rinse, repeat. Okay, Chris, you have, is this your last poll?
Last poll.
Last
So
poll.
after today, all this great stuff that Seth's just talked about here, how likely are you to prioritize AI search this year? Some of you may have already started and it's in progress. That would be pretty cool. I don't think we've seen a lot of that yet. Very likely you're already in those planning stages. Somewhat likely, but you're still trying to socialize the idea. You're not sure yet. Maybe you need some more information, and we're always happy to help share some of that information if you need. Or unlikely, you've just got too many other priorities right now. So
So for those who are in flight, I'd like to talk to you guys as well, because I'm curious as to how you're going about that process, and if there are efficiencies that you can bring to that process. Again, we're seeing vast improvements in how these projects can be done, and it really is amazing. And it's really the goal is to be able to build a system that's end to end. You ingest content, it does all of its magic, it derives all the architecture, and then it ingests it, and then you have the ability for someone to access it. It's not there yet, right? And even though the models are getting better and the AI is getting more powerful, you still need these pieces. You still need a content architecture. You still need metadata, right? I remember talking to a CIO, CFO, right, a finance organization. So why do we need this? Why do we need, taxonomies and metadata and ontologies? Why don't we just get Google? And I said, do you have a chart of accounts for your finance organization? He said, yes, I do. Why don't you get rid of your chart of accounts and just get Google? Because a taxonomy is a chart of accounts for knowledge, right? So you will never get rid of this. You're never going to get rid of this. AI is not going to obviate the need for knowledge and information architecture. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and, we've got one more. Oh, we got a couple more coming in. Maybe
all over the map here.
Yeah.
So someone's already started. That's awesome.
Yeah. Good.
Got lots of planning here. Very cool. And what I love about this is it's not just about making stuff easier. We are really driving businesses forward today. It's not just infrastructure. It really is, tangible business value. And that I find that very cool.
Yeah, it's exciting. This is an exciting time because the tools are very capable, but then the way you can use these tools is what's super exciting. Let me just see if there's another Q&A in here.
So we're coming in. Keep the questions coming in. I know we've only got a couple minutes left, but we can get a couple of questions in.
Yeah, so there we are. Let me go ahead and close that out and invite you to talk to us. Again, you don't necessarily have to do it today, but you can put any other questions you have in the Q&A. Let's see, we've answered.
So one of the questions that I saw come in is you showed a really sophisticated metadata strategy earlier. So for companies without strong taxonomy or governance framework today, is this going to require a huge consulting lift, or can teams realistically do some of this themselves?
So in terms of building out the reference architecture, the metadata?
That's how I understand that, yeah.
So it's going to require some attention to this. It's not a huge consulting lift. I mean, that's why I'm so excited about this, because the stuff that would have taken $1 million even a couple of years ago can be done for a fraction of that today. That's what's exciting for me, is that there's still huge need. I mean, my book that I wrote 5 years ago, The AI-Powered Enterprise, was about ontologies and how they support AI. And more organizations are realizing that that is critical. That book was written before large language models. Everything in it is still valid today. In fact, it's more important. Someone reposted there's no AI without IA, that article, you can do a search for it, and said this is more important today than it was in 2017. I actually wrote it in 2016, but he said 2017. But the point here is it's critical. And being able to apply these principles is more practical and cost effective than ever. Because I would always get that pushback. It's too expensive. It takes too much, right? It's too complex. It's complex, but it's not mysterious. But again, the cost effectiveness has vastly changed in terms of being able to do this stuff. So I'm excited about it. Go ahead, Chris.
That leads to another question that had come in about how do you recommend IT leaders frame the ROI of these projects when they're talking to the business side? What's the best way to connect the improved product data to the real business outcomes?
Well, again, IT is not necessarily going to be able to provide that, right? That is going to be on the business, but IT can support, the directionally where they want to get that value by saying, where is that intervention? Understanding the data flows, understanding the content flows, the product information, and where is that intervention needed? And are we instrumented to be able to measure a baseline today? Because we need a baseline. That's the one thing I want you to walk away with is measure. What does good look like? You need use cases to say, what's the future going to be? What's that future state? Because if we do all these things and they should be unambiguous, you should be able to do it or not do it, then that's going to be good. And then what's the impact of doing those things? So you need to think about metrics, baseline measures, the ability to intervene and have an impact and show that to the rest of the organization. And again, I'm tremendously excited about this these days because I've been doing this for a very long time. And now we really have the tools to accelerate this in an organization and do it to the degree that we could not in the past. And with all of these tools coming together, it's really a wonderful time to be tackling these problems.
Absolutely. So we were at the top of the hour. Thanks again, Seth, and for everyone that's joined today. We couldn't get through all the questions. We'll follow up with you afterwards, but please let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
Join us on social media, reach out to us over email. We're here to help. And again, thank you all for coming. We'll send the slides and recording out later.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Carolyn, for all the hard work putting this together. And thank you, everybody for attending. Bye now.